Hello, everyone. Today, this article is from Studies in Higher Education, which is the top-ranking journal in the field of higher education. Specifically, this article is having a international component as well, and it's focusing on Chinese universities' internationalization movement by adopting criteria of evaluating professors to publish on international journals, like SSCI journals. So this article is studying this very interesting phenomenon happening in Chinese higher education. And the leading author is Xing Shu, who is a Chinese PhD, doctor, PhD in education. And being a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Oxford. And Dr. Rose and Ong Thea worked with her, and they are all already tenured professors. Those two. And the author talked about the incentive schemes, and they collected incentive documents about Chinese higher education's kind of policy of talking about how would they motivate researchers and professors in Chinese universities, kind of how to motivate them and provide monetary, including funding and cash rewards for them to publish in international journals, and also some other incentives like putting it as an evaluation criteria for them to apply the job, as well as to get promoted to have a tenure position. Apart from the policy analysis, they also interviewed 6 administrators in Chinese universities, and also editors of Chinese journals, who also have a kind of a by role in being a professor and administrators, several of them. So and those are the methodologies they use, and the main finding is about the 2 incentives Chinese universities given, which is monetary as well as this career-related incentive for researchers to publish in international journals. Kind of the second finding is about how SSCI is ranked higher than A and HCI journals, and both of them are much higher than local Chinese journals. So that's the second finding. And from that finding, the author argues that there is a kind of reproduction of the high quality journals in those already established prestigious journals, and that might be problematic. And they call it as a Matthew effect, which is a reproduction cycle of how more prestigious journal get more prestigious, and how kind of which are basically all Western standards and have a limited coverage of the topic, methodologies, etc., of what we do as research. So that's there are kind of also implications too. They argue that maybe we can have more diverse scope to introduce to how Chinese university is viewing this thing we call high quality journal, and maybe to bring some more diversified perspective to those incentive documents. So that's a brief summary of this article. While they do have an introduction section by justifying why this topic is important, because they only focus on HSS, which is humanities and social science. And they say in China, there is a kind of 2 separate things, like one is HSS, the other is natural science. And natural science has attracted so many attention already, while HSS needs more attention, and it is a little bit disadvantaged already because it only has 3% international journal publications in China, and this area needs more attention. And one way to do that, one way to kind of putting more attention on this is this research, which is focusing on how HSS is like being internationalized in multiple documents from university asking researchers to all of HSS to publish their research in international journals. And they have a brief overview of how HSS was overlooked in Chinese government's policy as a like kind of one-way learning from the West in the 2000s. And later, there is another way strategy, which is called going out strategy. And they use that as another strategy to facilitate the internationalization of higher education, specifically HSS in China. So that's a brief review of the policy, national policy. And then they also reviewed articles from other countries as well, including Korea and other regions, Taiwan. So, echoing for those policy discourses, China is encouraging HSS academics to publish in internationally indexed journals, including SSCI. And then, as we mentioned, there might be a problem existing already, and many people are critiquing that for people worshiping publication in internationally kind of prestigious journals. And there is a debate, and however, there is few empirical study kind of diving into this problem, this debate. So this author is focusing on the scale and structure of incentive schemes to kind of explore the nitty-gritty of the debate about how Chinese higher education is providing the incentives and motivations for researchers to publish in high-ranked international journals as a strategy to internationalize the higher education, the university itself. They did a literature review of different types of governmental incentives for people to publish in higher ranking international journals. And there are 3 types of them. The first is providing funding for the institution. The second is career-related incentives for individuals to get employed and promoted. And then the third one is to provide directly cash incentives for individuals. Once they produced a journal and published in SSCI, they will get rewarded with cash. So as we mentioned already, like South Korea and Taiwan has similar types of incentives given by government for researchers to publish in international journals. And they are all emphasizing SSCI publications. While after a kind of one paragraph review on the types of incentives government is giving, they then identify the challenge of assessing HSS research. They said that there might be a problem of using the same evaluation criteria for HSS with natural science, because those two fields has different patterns of publication, and the citational patterns are so different as well. While the current incentive documents and government's incentive types are basically based on NS, like natural science patterns, for example, by adopting the citation numbers for promoting for evaluating which journal is more important and high quality, while the authors say maybe this might be problematic because like they're different and we might not adopt the same criteria and methodologies for HSS from just directly adopt from NS, natural science. And then they kind of put in a narrower scope for their literature review, like after you kind of review the different countries' policies and the problems of the challenge of HSS research, they then narrowing it down to a context of Chinese university. And they say there are monetary incentives for natural science publications, while they do not study HSS incentives, and there is a gap there. So they are contributing with this research focusing on HSS, and that's why they're conducting this study. So the literature review section successfully justified why they're conducting this study and the research gaps that the current field is having. So the methodology they use to fill that gap is first a textual analysis of policy documents from the universities, Chinese universities. So they reviewed and analyzed 172 institutional documents, which are specifically about the incentives and motivations that universities is providing for any researchers publishing in international journals. And they collected those documents from online, from website, and also during the field work in China when they are interacting with administrators and journal editors. They then, like those people gave them a little bit extra documents, 23 documents more for them to study. And they, based on their collection of the documents, they did a descriptive mapping and thematic analysis of those contents. And they also, like apart from analyzing the documents, they also interviewed the administrators and journal editors, asking them the process of kind of making that document, revising that document, and any comments or kind of reviews or kind of comments about feedbacks about those documents. So their way of analyzing the interview data is through coding, open coding, pattern coding, and clustering and comparing and connecting different people's interview transcripts. And they also lay out how they ensured the reliability and accuracy for their coding process. So they have a kind of peer review for like across team members, and there is a agreement on the coders coding. So they said then they have a kind of reliability on their coding method. And then they also used a back translation strategy because the documents and interviews are in Chinese. And they want to make sure that their translation are accurate. So they use this method called back translation, which is basically translate the original text, which are in Chinese, to English. And then based on the translated English, they just translate it back to Chinese and compare those two versions of Chinese text. One is the original text in Chinese, and the other one is after kind of the back translation technique version of Chinese text. If there is high consistency, there would be no problem. So that is how they ensure the accuracy of translation. And they also reviewed the websites of the university and the government to get a context of how this document is made and what our specific terms mean. So in order to improve the accuracy of their interpretation and translation of the documents and the interview data. So that's how they describe about their methodology, including their data collection process and their data analysis methods. And then we come to a point of discussing the findings. So the first finding is about the incentives. There are two types of incentives found in the documents, in the incentive documents, they call it. And basically, there are monetary incentives, which is providing fundings and cash rewards for people publishing in international journals. The second one is career-related incentives, which are scattered in a way that it appears in multiple places, including the kind of the job post. Like the job post is asking people, is requiring applicant to have already published in international journals at least once or even more to apply for a kind of professor position. And also the promotion regulations and other evaluative documents. So those kind of scattered documents all leading into the career-related incentives that the government and university is providing. And then they also, actually before they talked about the types of incentives, they also discussed a little bit about how their data is actually varied in terms of the incentive documents. So they said the incentive schemes were unevenly distributed by regions. So the areas that is not in kind of eastern, kind of more developed area does not have much of incentive schemes published. While also there is a kind of time period that these documents appeared most frequently, which is during the period of 2016, and especially since 2006, where there is a Chinese national policy for the internationalization of HSS. And this is a consistent finding with those other literature talking about how HSS and their internationalization strategy is being acknowledged and recognized, and thus can be reflected also in those incentive documents. And then, as we said, here is a table, a kind of visualization of how like different years they have different documents published around HSS incentive schemes. And then there are 6 types of documents that they examined in order to reach to their findings. And those are the schemes from the university about the monetary incentives, and also some regulations on academic evaluations, and some journal lists, like the ranking of the journals, and career-related evaluations, including promotion requirements, and employment posts, and other documents around employment. So those are the 6 types of documents that they examined. And they also revealed that from the bonus scheme, they find that publication in SSCI and A&HCI journals attracted more money, like in sum, than other journals, like local Chinese journals. And also, they, like those two, HSCI and A&HCI journals publications, are viewed as highest level of achievement for a researcher. So those are the certain journals that the document is emphasizing on, and they received greater weight when when Chinese higher education and government evaluating a researcher's achievement. So they also provided some ratios, like some numbers, numerical kind of representation of how important, how valued that international journals has been reviewed, has been perceived by the university and government. And it is like one publication on SSCI or A&HCI journal, which is like international journal, is equals to 4 journals published in local Chinese journals. And sometimes it goes more extreme, which is like 7:1 value ratio in some cases for in some like employment documents. And the ranking of publication is their third finding, and it is very similar to the second finding, which is talking about how the impact factor ranking and the journal list or kind of value more of the international ranking journals instead of the local Chinese journals. So the prioritization is on SSCI. And there are more detailed kind of summative and descriptive findings about the monetary bonuses. And the finding is similar, very similar to what we just talked. So SSCI received the most kind of cash or funding rewards, while others received less. And there is another kind of mini finding talking about how natural science is usually received higher rewards than HSS. So that's kind of the focusing on the monetary rewards. They also talked about the requirement to receive those rewards, which is this first authorship requirement. You have to be the first author or corresponding author to receive a incentive, monetary incentive like this. And the author also talked about this is a requirement shared across universities in China. And this is kind of a phenomenon of people of university acting alike each other. And then they talked about the institutional aims kind of as the reason why Chinese universities are increasingly promoting and encouraging researchers to publish in international journals. And it is because they are trying to become a world-class university. Those are the performative goals that the university is wanting to achieve. And there are national policies backing them up. And there is another kind of finding from the interviews with administrators and editors, and that is about the process of making that kind of documents and policies about encouraging people to just to publish on SSCI and other internationally ranked articles. So it seems that from their finding, the authoritative models are featured. And it is a decision-making mechanism that is more like top-down. So that's the first type, actually. So which is the policy and the document are drafted by one or several authorities who are senior administrators and then reviewed by other relevant offices and university leadership. So that's the first type of how university making the policy, making the documents. While there is a second policy, which is COD, which is a little bit similar, but COD top-down model, because the documents are drafted by university office and then reviewed by relevant university leaders and receiving feedback from academics. And the third type model is called bottom-up, and it is a policy-making process that is initialized by a departmental academic committee and reviewed by the university later. And according to the interviews with the administrators, that a lot of those three models, the policy-making processes are in some way adopted from other similar documents. So kind of learning from other universities documents are part of the decision-making process. And apart from making the policy, they also discuss something about revising the policy. So the process of revising those incentive documents and schemes. So they find that there are a portion, kind of 20% of the documents are revised, and including adding more specific requirement and change the reward value to their policies. And they say it's probably related to the institution's agenda, like the institution's agenda change. So they added more requirements in the documents. And they also find some changes in the impact factor thresholders. And there is a thing saying quality over quantity kind of pattern involving in Chinese university right now. They are being more strict about what kind of journals are considered as high quality, and they are kind of excluding the third and fourth layer even within this SSCI journal kind of cluster. So they're selecting, they're being even more competitive ever, and increasingly in Chinese higher education right now. So that's all about the findings. They talked a lot about the documents, what types of incentives university is giving, so monetary and career related incentives, and the different types of documents even they're reviewing, and how the process of policy making and revising the policy are like based on the interviews with administrators and interviewers, and also why they're having this policy based on the institutional aims of being a world-class university. And also they point out the problems of maybe we're too focusing on SSCI journals, while maybe the perspectives could be diversified, while that's just a suggestion. While the reality is like people are being more and more competitive in what journals are considered as high quality. So discussion here is connecting back to the national policy of going out and internationalize the higher education. So it is a kind of highlights of a emphasis on exporting research by publishing in internationally indexed journals to make a university world class. So the national policy is basically encouraging that phenomenon of publishing in international journals. While the author pointed out that there is little critiques about what is happening in China right now, because it seems that firstly, there is a high similarity across the documents. So university is imitating another university and they are becoming all the same. So there is a hegemony kind of thing going on there, while less diversity is kind of coming out based on what is happening. And then they also critiqued that, like with a term called Matthew effect, which is a reproduction of journals prestigious or kind of their high quality journal becoming even more prestigious because this packing order of publication. Like here is a interesting visualization. So firstly, SSCI is kind of giving incentives, like universities are giving incentives for researchers to publish on SSCI and A&HCI publications. And then academias, like researchers, are self-selected because they're only going to get those reward and promotion only if they are publishing on those journals. So they only publishing those journals they selected before they submit their journals. And then that leads to a high quality papers submitted to those journals, making those journals even more prestigious because they can receive and review a large amount of journals and only select the most prestigious ones, most maybe high quality ones. So that's the reproduction cycle. I think they also talked a little bit more about like the critiques on how HSS as a field is also kind of directly borrowing the criteria from natural science. And they say they cause for a discipline specific evaluation criteria for HSS. The conclusion is a kind of a summarization of what they find, which is higher education in China is providing monetary and career-related incentives for people to publish on international journals. And they find that there is a selective influence called Matthew effect to this phenomenon of reproductive cycle of how journals is becoming more prestigious because of those incentive documents, specifically acknowledging merely those internationally ranked journals in China. And that's all about this article today. It is kind of interesting to critically thinking about this thing, while it is questionable to say anything would change. And it is also interesting to see the mixed method research, this study, those three authors are conducting, because they are combining textual analysis of documents with interviews with real people who are involving in the policy making and revising stage of those documents. And hopefully this leaves you something to think about, and hopefully it is also sounds interesting to you. Thank you for listening.